Jedediah lived a simple life out on the dusty plains. His days were filled with the quiet routine of tending to his small ranch, mending fences, feeding the chickens, and watching the sun rise and set over the endless fields. He wasn't unhappy, but he was undeniably lonely. His only companions were his trusty horse, Betsy, and a scruffy old dog named Blue. Jedediah was known throughout the small town of Harmony Gulch for his kind heart and gentle way. He always had a smile for everyone, even if he didn't have much to say. He wasn't much for gambling, but one Saturday night, feeling particularly lonesome, he decided to join the poker game at the Golden Nugget Saloon. The air was thick with smoke and the clatter of coins. Jedediah mostly watched, nursing a sarsaparilla. But when the pot grew large enough, fueled by the boasts and bluffs of the other players, he threw in his meager savings. Luck, it seemed, was on his side that night. He won the hand, and the room erupted in laughter. Jedediah, confused, reached for the winnings. It wasn't money, though. Instead, a deed was thrust into his hand. A deed for a person. Sarah, the deed read. A woman, paralyzed from the waist down, who had been abandoned by her family. The other players thought it was the funniest joke they'd ever played. Jedediah stared at the deed, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. The laughter of the men rang in his ears, each chuckle a cruel echo in the smoky saloon. He looked at the faces around him, expecting to see some sign of remorse, but there was only amusement. He knew then that he was alone in this, and whatever he decided to do, he would have to do it himself. The deed felt heavy in Jedediah's hand, heavier than any gold he'd ever held. He tucked it into his shirt pocket, the rough paper a constant reminder of the situation. He mumbled a quick good night to the still laughing men and stumbled out of the saloon, the cool night air a welcome relief from the smoky interior. Betsy, his loyal horse, waited patiently outside. He climbed into the saddle, his mind racing. He knew where Sarah was, a small, run-down shack on the outskirts of town, barely fit for an animal, let alone a person. He'd heard whispers about her, about the family who had left her there after the accident. He'd always felt a pang of sympathy, but he'd never known how to help. Now, suddenly, he was responsible. Riding towards the shack, the moon cast long shadows across the plains. He imagined Sarah, alone and helpless, waiting in the darkness. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, how he was going to care for someone who needed so much. He was just a simple cowboy, used to the solitude of a ranch. He wasn't a doctor or a caretaker or anything that Sarah needed. He considered turning back, riding away, and forgetting the whole thing. No one would blame him. It was a joke, after all. But as he neared the shack, a tiny light flickered in the window, a fragile beacon in the darkness. And Jedediah knew he couldn't leave her there. He had to at least try. He owed her that much. He dismounted Betsy, took a deep breath, and walked towards the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He raised his hand and knocked softly. The knock was soft, barely audible above the creaking of the shack in the wind. Inside, Sarah sat huddled in a worn armchair, a thin blanket wrapped around her legs. The lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the small room feel even smaller. She hadn't expected anyone. Not anymore. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice raspy from disuse. Jedediah hesitated for a moment. "It's Jedediah," he said, his voice a low rumble. From a saloon. There was a long silence. Sarah knew what that meant. She knew about the poker game, about the cruel joke the men had played. Her heart sank. She had hoped, foolishly, that someone had forgotten about her, that she could simply fade away in peace. But now, here was Jedediah, the kind-hearted cowboy, burdened with her unwanted existence. "Go away," she said, her voice flat. "I don't want anything to do with you." Jedediah didn't move. "I know this is unexpected," he said, "but I won the deed, and I feel responsible." "Responsible?" Sarah scoffed. "You feel responsible for a broken woman? Just leave me alone. I'm better off by myself." Jedediah stood there, his hands still raised. He could hear the pain in her voice, the bitterness that had settled deep in her soul. He understood. He knew what it was like to feel alone to feel unwanted. But he also knew that he couldn't just walk away. "I'm not going to leave," he said, his voice firm. "Not tonight. Let me just help you get comfortable. Then, if you still wanted to go in the morning, I will." He waited, holding his breath. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Finally, Sarah sighed. "Fine," she said, "but don't expect me to be grateful." Jedediah entered the shack, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was stale and musty, heavy with the scent of dust and despair. Sarah watched him, her expression unreadable. He saw the weariness in her eyes, the lines etched around her mouth that spoke of pain and hardship. He quickly assessed the situation. The shack was sparsely furnished, with only the armchair, a rickety bed, and a small table. There was a bucket in the corner, presumably for waste. "What do you need?" he asked, trying to keep his voice gentle. Sarah pointed to a pitcher on the table. "Water," she croaked, "and help me to bed." Jedediah filled a cup with water and helped her drink. He then carefully lifted her from the armchair and carried her to the bed. She was surprisingly light, her bones fragile beneath the thin fabric of her dress. As he laid her down, their eyes met. He saw a flicker of something in her gaze, a hint of vulnerability that she quickly masked with a scowl. He covered her with a blanket, trying to ignore the feeling of helplessness that washed over him. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He wasn't equipped for this, but he knew he couldn't leave her like this. He spent the next hour tending to her basic needs, cleaning the shack as best he could, and making her as comfortable as possible. All the while, Sarah remained silent, watching him with a mixture of suspicion and resignation. As he prepared to leave her for the night, placing a chair beside the bed, he looked at her one last time. "I'll be here in the morning," he said. "If you need anything, just call out." He blew out the lamp, plunging the shack into darkness. He sat in the chair, listening to her breathing, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Resentment, pity, responsibility, and something else, something he couldn't quite name, swirled within him. He had a long night ahead of him. The first rays of dawn crept through the cracks in the shack, waking Jedediah. He'd barely slept, his body stiff and aching from the uncomfortable chair. He looked over at Sarah, who was still asleep, her face pale and drawn. He knew he should leave. He'd promised her he would. He could go back to his quiet life, to the familiar routines of the ranch. But as he watched her, a sense of resolve settled over him. He couldn't abandon her, not after seeing the despair in her eyes, the pain she carried within her. He saw her not as a burden, not as a joke, but as a person, a woman who deserved kindness and care. He slipped out of the shack and walked towards his horse. He needed to make a decision, a real decision. He could take her back to town and try to find someone to care for her. Maybe the church would help. But he knew, deep down, that no one would care for her the way she needed, the way she deserved. He thought of the laughter in the saloon, the cruelty in the men's eyes. He couldn't subject Sarah to that again. He looked back at the shack, at the small, fragile structure that held so much pain. He knew what he had to do. He was no expert, but he was strong, and he was willing to learn. He would care for Sarah himself. He would bring her back to his ranch, to his home. He would give her the best life he could, despite her limitations. He took a deep breath, the morning air filling his lungs with a newfound determination. He mounted Betsy and rode towards town, not to find someone to take Sarah away, but to gather supplies. He would need food, medicine, and anything else that might make her life a little easier. He was a cowboy, not a caretaker, but he was about to learn, and he was going to do it with all his heart. The first few weeks were incredibly difficult. Jedediah quickly realized that caring for Sarah was far more challenging than he had imagined. He had to learn everything from scratch, how to help her with her personal hygiene, how to prepare meals she could easily eat, and how to prevent bed sores. He spent hours reading old medical books and pestering the town doctor with questions, much to the doctor's initial annoyance and eventual grudging respect. Sarah, for her part, remained distant and uncooperative. She resented her dependence on Jedediah, and she made no effort to hide it. She was often irritable and demanding, testing his patience at every turn. She refused to participate in her care, making even the simplest tasks a struggle. "Why are you doing this?" she would ask, her voice laced with suspicion. "You don't owe me anything." Jedediah never knew how to answer that question. He just kept doing what he thought was right. He cleaned her, fed her, and tried to make her as comfortable as possible, all while enduring her constant complaints and insults. He knew she was hurting, and he tried to be patient, reminding himself that her bitterness was a shield against the world. There were days when he wanted to give up, when he felt overwhelmed by the sheer exhaustion of it all. But then he would look at Sarah, at the pain in her eyes, and he would find the strength to keep going. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a change began to occur. As Jedediah continued to care for her with unwavering kindness and patience, Sarah began to soften. The sharp edges of her resentment began to wear down, revealing a flicker of the woman she once was, a woman buried beneath layers of pain and despair. And Jedediah, in turn, found himself growing increasingly fond of her, admiring her strength and resilience, even in the face of such immense hardship. He was still a cowboy, but he was quickly becoming something more, a caretaker, a friend, and perhaps something even deeper. Sarah's bitterness wasn't just a shield. It was a deep-seated despair that had taken root in her soul. Before the accident, she had been a vibrant, independent woman, full of life and dreams. She'd been a schoolteacher, loved by her students and respected by the community. She had a fiancé, a loving family, and a bright future ahead of her. Then, in a single, devastating moment, it was all taken away. A runaway horse had bolted through town, and she'd been caught in its path. The accident left her paralyzed, her dreams shattered, and her spirit broken. Her fiancé, unable to cope with her disability, left her. Her family, burdened by the expense of her care, eventually abandoned her in the shack. She felt like a burden, a broken thing that no one wanted. She had lost her purpose, her dignity, and her hope. She pushed Jedediah away because she didn't want to be a burden to him, either. She didn't want him to waste his life caring for her. She believed she was better off alone, even if it meant living in misery and despair. She tested him constantly. She refused to eat. She refused to bathe. She refused to speak. She wanted him to give up, to walk away and leave her to her fate. But Jedediah wouldn't break. He persisted day after day with his quiet kindness and unwavering patience. He would sit by her bedside and read to her from old books, his voice a soothing balm to her wounded spirit. He would tell her stories about the ranch, about Betsy and Blue, about the beauty of the plains. He didn't try to force her to be happy or to pretend that everything was all right. He simply offered her his presence, his compassion, and his unwavering support. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ice around her heart began to thaw. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during one of Jedediah's reading sessions. He was reading a particularly silly poem about a lovesick skunk, and he stumbled over a word, mispronouncing it in a way that was utterly ridiculous. Sarah, who had been listening with her usual stony silence, suddenly let out a small giggle. It was a tiny sound, barely audible, but it was enough. Jedediah stopped reading, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at Sarah, and he saw a flicker of amusement in her eyes. He smiled, a wide, genuine smile that lit up his face. "Did I say it wrong?" he asked, feigning innocence. Sarah rolled her eyes, but the corners of her mouth were twitching. "You butchered it," she said, her voice still a little rough, but with a hint of warmth. Jedediah grinned. "Well, I ain't no schoolteacher like you," he said. "Maybe you can teach me a thing or two." And that was it. The ice was broken. From that moment on, Sarah began to open up, just a little at first, and then more and more each day. She started to participate in her care, offering suggestions, and even cracking a few jokes of her own. She began to tell Jedediah about her life before the accident, about her students, her fiancé, and her dreams. She shared her pain, her fears, and her hopes for the future. Jedediah listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support. He learned about the woman she was and the woman she still could be. He saw her strength, her intelligence, and her unwavering spirit. And he fell in love with her, not out of pity or obligation, but out of genuine admiration and respect. He knew that he would do everything in his power to help her reclaim her life, to find joy and purpose again. He was no longer just her caretaker. He was her friend, her confidant, and her biggest supporter. As Sarah began to heal emotionally, Jedediah turned his attention to improving her physical circumstances. He was determined to give her the opportunity to experience the world beyond the confines of the ranch house. He started by building a ramp leading from the house to the yard, so she could easily get outside. He used his carpentry skills, honed from years of mending fences, to create a sturdy and safe incline. Then he set about designing a wheelchair. He couldn't afford to buy one, so he decided to build one himself. He scoured the junkyard for spare parts, repurposing old wagon wheels, metal scraps, and leather straps. He spent weeks tinkering and adjusting, driven by a desire to create something that would give Sarah a sense of freedom and independence. The final product wasn't pretty, but it was functional. It was a sturdy, wooden-framed wheelchair with large wheels that could navigate the uneven terrain of the ranch. He even added a small basket in the front for her to carry things. When he presented the wheelchair to Sarah, she was speechless. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, her eyes filled with tears. It's beautiful," she whispered. Jedediah helped her into the chair, and for the first time since the accident, Sarah was able to move around on her own. She wheeled herself down the ramp and into the yard, her face radiant with joy. She explored the garden, touching the flowers and breathing in the fresh air. She watched the chickens pecking in the dirt, and she laughed as Blue chased after a butterfly. It was a simple thing, but it meant everything. Jedediah had given her back a piece of her life, a piece of her freedom. And as he watched her wheel around the yard, his heart swelled with love and pride. He knew that this was just the beginning. He would continue to find ways to adapt the world to her needs, to help her live a full and meaningful life, despite her limitations. He would make sure that she never felt trapped or helpless again. One afternoon, as Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sunset, she began to tell Jedediah a story. It was a tale from her childhood about a mischievous little girl who lived on a farm and had all sorts of wild adventures. Jedediah listened, captivated by her vivid descriptions and her talent for storytelling. "You should write these stories down," he said when she finished. "They're too good to just be told once." Sarah scoffed. "Right? What's the point? No one would want to read them." "I would," Jedediah said, "and I bet others would too. You have a gift, Sarah. You shouldn't let it go to waste." He encouraged her to start writing, bringing her paper and pencils, and setting up a small writing desk on the porch. At first, she was hesitant, unsure of herself, but Jedediah's unwavering support gave her the courage to try. She started slowly, writing short stories about her life, about her students, and about the people she had known. As she wrote, she found a sense of purpose again, a way to express her thoughts and feelings. She discovered that she had a talent for weaving words into beautiful and compelling narratives. Jedediah read every story she wrote, offering encouragement and constructive criticism. He marveled at her creativity and her ability to capture the essence of human experience. He knew that she had something special, something that could bring joy and inspiration to others. He began to share her stories with the townspeople, reading them aloud at the general store and the saloon. People were captivated by Sarah's writing, drawn in by her heartfelt characters and her powerful storytelling. They were amazed by her talent, and they began to see her in a new light. She was no longer just the paralyzed woman. She was Sarah, the writer, the storyteller, the artist. And she was beginning to find her place in the world again, not as a burden, but as a gift. Despite the growing admiration for Sarah's writing, the community's initial reaction to Jedediah's actions had been far from supportive. Whispers and rumors spread like wildfire through Harmony Gulch. People gossiped behind his back, questioning his motives and doubting his sincerity. "Why is he doing it?" they would ask. "He must be after something." Some suspected he was after her money, even though everyone knew Sarah had nothing. Others believed he was just trying to make himself look good, seeking attention and praise for his good deed. Some of the women even gossiped that Jedediah was just lonely and using Sarah for company, a cruel and unfair assessment of his genuine care. It won't last, they predicted. He'll get tired of it eventually. Caring for someone like that is hard work. The men, especially those who had participated in the poker game, felt a mixture of guilt and resentment. They didn't understand why Jedediah was going to such lengths for Sarah. They saw her as a burden, a liability, and they couldn't comprehend his willingness to take on such a responsibility. They made snide remarks and sarcastic comments, trying to undermine his efforts and discourage him from continuing. They would often see him in town getting supplies and say under their breath, "Still playing nursemaid, Jedediah," or "Having fun yet?" Jedediah mostly ignored it, but he could feel their eyes on him, judging him, questioning him. It was difficult to block out the negativity, but he focused on Sarah, on her needs, and on the progress she was making. He knew that he was doing the right thing, and that was all that mattered. He kept his head high, his shoulders square, and continued to care for Sarah with unwavering dedication, determined to prove them wrong. He would show them that his actions were not motivated by self-interest, but by genuine compassion and love. Jedediah and Sarah resolved to show the community the value they brought. It wasn't enough for Sarah to just write stories. They needed to find a way for her talent to directly benefit the town. Jedediah, ever resourceful, came up with an idea. He noticed that the town's schoolhouse was in desperate need of repair. The roof leaked, the windows were broken, and the books were tattered and worn. He proposed to the town council that Sarah write a series of stories specifically for the children, and that they sell the stories to raise money for the school. The town council, still skeptical, reluctantly agreed. They figured it couldn't hurt to try. Sarah, energized by the challenge, threw herself into the project. She wrote stories about brave pioneers, clever animals, and the importance of kindness and community. Jedediah helped her edit and illustrate the stories, creating simple but charming drawings to accompany her words. They printed the stories on simple paper, binding them together with twine. Jedediah then took to the streets, selling the books to the townspeople. At first, people were hesitant, but as they read the stories, they were captivated by Sarah's writing and Jedediah's illustrations. They saw the heart and soul that went into each page, and they were moved by the message of hope and resilience that permeated her work. The book sold like wildfire. The townspeople were so impressed by Sarah's talent and Jedediah's dedication that they not only bought the books, but they also donated extra money to the school fund. Soon, they had enough money to repair the roof, fix the windows, and buy new books for the children. Sarah's success not only helped the school, but it also changed the way the community viewed her. They saw her not as a burden, but as an asset, a valuable member of their town. She became a source of pride and inspiration, a symbol of what could be achieved with talent, determination, and the support of a loving friend. The town began to see Jedediah differently, too. He was no longer just a lonely cowboy taking care of a disabled woman. He was a kind and generous man who had given Sarah a chance to shine, and who had brought the community together in the process. The success of the schoolhouse project was just the beginning. Word of Sarah's talent spread beyond Harmony Gulch, reaching neighboring towns and even the big city. A newspaper reporter, hearing about the remarkable woman who was captivating hearts with her stories, traveled to the ranch to interview her. The reporter was immediately impressed by Sarah's intelligence, her wit, and her ability to articulate her thoughts and feelings with such grace and power. He wrote a glowing article about her, highlighting her talent, her resilience, and her extraordinary relationship with Jedediah. The article was published in newspapers across the state, bringing Sarah widespread recognition and admiration. Letters poured in from readers who were touched by her stories and inspired by her example. People wanted to know more about her, to read more of her work. Soon, Sarah was receiving requests to write stories for newspapers and magazines. She even received an offer to publish a book of her collected stories. Jedediah, ever the supportive partner, helped her negotiate the contracts and manage her growing career. Her stories were shared far and wide, bringing joy and inspiration to people from all walks of life. They were translated into different languages, adapted into plays, and even turned into a radio show. Sarah's words touched the hearts of millions, reminding them of the power of hope, the importance of kindness, and the beauty of the human spirit. Her work was displayed in libraries and museums, alongside the works of renowned authors and artists. She received awards and accolades, recognizing her extraordinary talent and her contribution to the world of literature. She used her platform to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities, inspiring others to overcome their challenges and pursue their dreams. Sarah, once seen as a burden, had become a beacon of light, illuminating the world with her words and her unwavering spirit. As Sarah's career blossomed, her relationship with Jedediah deepened. What had started as a sense of responsibility and compassion had grown into something far more profound, a deep and abiding love. They had shared so much together, the struggles, the triumphs, the quiet moments of companionship. They had seen each other at their best and their worst, and they had accepted each other unconditionally. They had built a life together based on mutual respect, admiration, and unwavering support. Jedediah loved Sarah for her intelligence, her wit, her strength, and her unwavering spirit. He admired her ability to overcome adversity and to find joy in the face of hardship. He loved her stories, her laughter, and the way she looked at him with such warmth and affection. Sarah loved Jedediah for his kindness, his patience, his generosity, and his unwavering loyalty. She admired his strength, his resourcefulness, and his willingness to do whatever it took to make her happy. She loved his gentle touch, his comforting presence, and the way he made her feel safe and loved. Their love wasn't a passionate, whirlwind romance. It was a slow-burning ember that had grown into a steady flame. It was a quiet, comfortable love that filled their lives with warmth and contentment. They found joy in the simple things, watching the sunset together, reading stories aloud, sharing a cup of coffee in the morning. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, Jedediah took Sarah's hand in his. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I love you more than words can say. Will you marry me?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Jedediah," she whispered. "Yes." Their happiness, however, was soon threatened. A severe drought struck the plains, devastating the crops and leaving many farmers struggling to survive. Jedediah's ranch, like many others, suffered greatly. The water well ran dry, the cattle grew thin, and the fields turned to dust. Their financial security, built on Sarah's writing income, began to crumble. The newspapers and magazines, facing their own economic hardships, could no longer afford to pay her as much for her stories. The royalties from her book dwindled, and the offers for new projects dried up. Adding to their woes, Sarah's health began to decline. The constant sitting and the lack of proper medical care took a toll on her body. She developed a persistent cough, and her breathing became labored. Jedediah worried that she was developing pneumonia. They were facing a perfect storm of adversity, financial hardship, environmental disaster, and a serious health scare. Jedediah felt helpless, unable to protect Sarah from the suffering that surrounded them. He watched her grow weaker each day, and he feared that he would lose her. He spent sleepless nights racking his brain, trying to find a way to save their ranch and to get Sarah the medical care she needed. He considered selling their land, but he knew that it wouldn't fetch much in the midst of the drought. He thought about asking for help from the townspeople, but he was too proud to beg. He was desperate, and he knew that time was running out. He had to find a solution, and he had to find it soon, or he risked losing everything he had worked so hard to build, including the love of his life. He knew they could get through this if they worked together, but he wasn't sure how much more they could endure. The plains were testing their limits. Just when Jedediah felt like all hope was lost, the community rallied around him and Sarah. They had seen their struggles, their hardships, and their unwavering commitment to each other. They realized that Jedediah and Sarah weren't just outsiders. They were valuable members of their town, and they deserved their support. The women organized a fundraising bake sale, selling pies, cakes, and cookies to raise money for Sarah's medical care. The men volunteered to help Jedediah repair his well, digging deeper and reinforcing the structure. They shared their meager water supplies, ensuring that Jedediah's cattle had enough to drink. The town doctor, who had initially been skeptical of Jedediah's efforts, visited Sarah regularly, providing her with the best medical care he could offer. He even contacted a specialist in the city, seeking advice on how to improve her condition. The children, inspired by Sarah's stories, wrote letters of encouragement and drew pictures for her, bringing her joy and reminding her of the impact she had on their lives. Even the men who had participated in the poker game, the ones who had initially mocked Jedediah and Sarah, came forward to offer their apologies and their support. They realized that they had been wrong to judge them, and they were determined to make amends. The community's outpouring of love and support was overwhelming. Jedediah and Sarah were touched by their generosity and their compassion. They realized that they weren't alone in their struggles. They had a community that cared about them, a community that was willing to stand by them in their time of need. With the help of the community, they were able to weather the storm. They secured Sarah the medical care she needed, they repaired their well, and they found ways to conserve their resources. The drought continued, but they faced it together, united by their love, their resilience, and the unwavering support of their community. Harmony Gulch had finally lived up to its name. Sarah's journey from abandoned invalid to celebrated author transformed her into a symbol of hope and resilience for people far beyond Harmony Gulch. Her story, widely publicized, resonated with those facing their own battles, proving that limitations did not define potential. People with disabilities wrote to her, sharing their struggles and seeking her advice. She responded with empathy and encouragement, urging them to focus on their strengths and to never give up on their dreams. She became a mentor to aspiring writers, offering guidance and support to help them hone their craft. She visited hospitals and rehabilitation centers, sharing her story with patients and inspiring them to overcome their physical and emotional challenges. She spoke passionately about the importance of inclusion and accessibility, advocating for a world where everyone had the opportunity to reach their full potential. She challenged societal perceptions of disability, demonstrating that people with disabilities were not helpless or dependent, but capable and contributing members of society. She showed the world that disability was not a barrier to success, but rather a source of strength and resilience. Her influence extended beyond the disability community. People facing financial hardships, personal tragedies, or other challenges found inspiration in her story. They saw her as a role model, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. Sarah's message was simple: never give up, never lose hope, and never let anyone tell you what you can't do. With Jedediah by her side, she continued to spread her message of hope and resilience, touching the lives of countless people and leaving a lasting legacy of kindness, compassion, and unwavering determination. She proved that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, it was possible to find joy, purpose, and a place in the world. She was a true inspiration, a beacon of light in a world that often seemed dark and hopeless. Jedediah and Sarah's love story became legendary, a testament to the power of kindness, compassion, and unwavering dedication. They were no longer just residents of Harmony Gulch. They were its heart and soul, its pride and joy. The town celebrated their wedding with a grand ceremony, attended by people from all over the state. The schoolhouse, which Sarah had helped to save, was decorated with flowers and ribbons. The children sang songs and read poems they had written in her honor. The townspeople showered them with gifts and blessings, expressing their gratitude for all that they had done. Jedediah and Sarah were honored with awards and accolades, recognizing their contributions to the community and to the world. They were invited to speak at conferences and events, sharing their story and inspiring others to make a difference. Their ranch became a haven for people with disabilities, a place where they could find support, encouragement, and a sense of belonging. Jedediah and Sarah welcomed visitors with open arms, offering them a safe and inclusive environment where they could pursue their dreams and reach their full potential. The town of Harmony Gulch, once known for its skepticism and prejudice, became a model of acceptance and inclusion. The townspeople learned to embrace diversity and to celebrate the unique talents and abilities of every individual. They realized that their community was stronger and more vibrant because of its differences. Jedediah and Sarah were living proof that love could conquer all, that kindness could transform lives, and that even the most unlikely of circumstances could lead to extraordinary outcomes. They were the pride of the plains, a shining example of what could be achieved with a little bit of hope, a lot of hard work, and a whole lot of love. They had transformed a cruel joke into a beautiful reality. Years passed, and Jedediah and Sarah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing day. They had faced countless challenges, but they had always overcome them together. They had built a life filled with love, laughter, and purpose, a life that had exceeded their wildest dreams. One evening, as the sun began to set over the plains, painting the sky with hues of orange, pink, and gold, Jedediah and Sarah sat on their porch, holding hands. Betsy, now old and gray, grazed peacefully in a nearby pasture. Blue, long gone, was remembered fondly in their stories. Sarah leaned her head against Jedediah's shoulder, her eyes filled with contentment. "Do you remember the night you came to my shack?" she asked, her voice soft and raspy. Jedediah smiled. "How could I forget?" he said. "It was the night my life changed forever." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink below the horizon. They reflected on their journey, on the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together, and on the power of kindness and acceptance to transform lives. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Sarah said. "We have," Jedediah replied, "and it's all been worth it." They looked at each other, their eyes filled with love and gratitude. They knew that they had been blessed with a rare and precious gift, a love that had defied all odds and had inspired countless others. As the last rays of sunlight faded away,